Welcome to the Dominate Your Niche podcast with me, Ruth Ferreira. Here we chat to some of today's best small business leaders, individuals who are shaking up their industry and dominating their niche. The show tackles all things business growth, from strategy, marketing and branding, and delves into the secrets of what it takes to dominate your niche. The aim of this podcast is to empower founders with big dreams, small and micro businesses, and even solopreneurs who are looking to make a big impact. People who are hungry to learn from those who have gone before them and implement that knowledge to next level in their own business. So welcome, lean in, and then go take action to propel yourself towards dominating your niche in your small business. Hello, and welcome to my very first solo episode of the Dominate Your Niche podcast with me, your host, Ruth Ferreira. Today, we are diving into something that many of us face, honestly, often on a day-to-day basis, but we rarely talk about, and that is imposter syndrome. It can strike in pretty much any situation, at work, at school, in your business, sometimes even in the supermarket. And it's a feeling of being a fraud that can just sneak up and get you. So I'd love us to really think about what does it mean and just explore the whole concept. So imposter syndrome is basically a feeling that a lot of us get, often on quite a regular basis, that you are not as good as people think you are. So it's maybe to do with you're not as skilled, you're not as capable, you're not as competent. And there's that feeling that you may be found out as a fraud. And I have to say, I thought this was a fantastic topic for my first solo podcast episode because I've been challenged recently by a lovely lady called Lindsay Gold, who is a podcasting guru who's recently come into my world and is making it all sorts of better. And she's really challenged me twice now to do solo podcast episodes. And in theory, it's not a hard thing to do, but I've definitely felt imposter syndrome coming up. And it almost stops me from recording them. So thoughts came into my head like, oh my goodness, who am I to do a solo episode? Or what would I even have to say? And honestly, I know loads of you are hearing this and you're actually laughing, but that's what imposter syndrome is. That's that voice in our head that other people would actually laugh at. Because I think a lot of the time it's easier for other people to see our potential, to see our value more than we can ourselves. And with my podcast, yes, now I'm actually very confident podcasting, but I'm very confident podcasting with a guest because I can hide behind them, essentially. Gosh, I'm being vulnerable here, guys. And that's why I wanted to explore this today, because I think this is going to surprise a lot of people that, I have imposter syndrome, that I experience this too. And I just want to normalize this is something that so many of us go through. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I have coached probably every single one of my clients on imposter syndrome at some point. I've actually been in mastermind sessions, and I feel fairly confident to share this because I've run 4 different groups with, I've run, oh my God, like upwards of 50 odd mastermind sessions over the past couple of years, probably loads more than that actually. And I've had one of my most respected, probably one of my most successful clients come into a mastermind group and literally burst into tears and say, guys, should I just quit now? What am I even doing here? And the crazy thing is that everyone else was looking at her. And honestly, I think they initially thought she might have been joking. I don't know. And it can be so useful sometimes just to actually share how you're feeling with a group and for them to be like, honestly, this is a normal feeling. You're doing great. So they can speak that life back into you. So, yeah, it is super common. So, I wanted to explore briefly the different types of imposter syndrome. And I got to tell you, imposter syndrome is not something I am an expert in. There are people who are experts in it. I just know a little bit about it, and I have definitely looked up these types. So, I make sure I'm telling you the right thing. So, there is one type which is called the perfectionist. And generally this type of imposter syndrome, it feels like anything that isn't perfect is a failure. They set super high standards and they can be quite anxious when they don't get there, which honestly must be tough. I definitely don't have that. I am not perfectionist at all. They try to make everything 100%. They can get really stuck in the details and they often downplay what they've achieved. Then you've got the expert. So, people who have this type of imposter syndrome, they can often feel like they need to know everything. They need to have all the answers to feel successful. And if they're not kind of the best around, then they feel like they're not good enough. And this person may, they may hide away and avoid asking questions, avoid showing up publicly because they don't want to risk being exposed. Then you've got the soloist. So, this is somebody who feels that asking for help is a sign of not being capable. Often they'll take on too much stuff themselves, knowing that if it's not them, it won't be done properly. And I know some of you are literally listening, and each of these, some of you will resonate with each of them. But for the soloist, honestly, it's a lot to take on their own, and it can really impact their well-being. Then you've got the natural genius. So this is somebody who they believe that if something doesn't come easily, doesn't come quickly, then they're not good at it. They expect to be able to just get things and run with them and do them easily and quickly. And for them, it can be quite hard to take on tasks that take a while to, or time or effort to master. And they feel like they're failing if they're not getting it immediately. And the final one that I'm aware of is the Superman, Superwoman. So this is somebody who, this type of imposter syndrome, they feel like they need to excel in all areas of their life. So their personal life, their health, their career, their relationships. And they can often push themselves to the limit to try and appear like they've got it all together and they're smashing it in every area. And honestly, as I'm sure you can guess, this is a fast track to burnout. Because often we can't do it all and they can ignore their own needs and ignore their own self-care in this process. Are you ready to grow your business this year? Join me for Supercharge Your Month, a 60-minute clarity and strategy workshop to reflect, plan, and get super strategic to make your growth dreams a reality. The first Tuesday of every month at 10 a.m. for just £97, or free if it's your first time. My gift to you. Book on now via the show notes. See you there. So, a lot of the time, imposter syndrome is triggered by environmental factors. So maybe it's personal experience, it might be social pressures. So there's quite a few common triggers. It can be society placing expectations on us to be successful, to be perfect, to be in control. And honestly, like social media, it's got a lot to answer for here. A lot of it, oh my goodness, and I'm going to do a whole podcast episode on this, is from our upbringing, from our early childhood. And actually, some of us grow up in environments where being successful or being almost like perfect is it's the way you have to be to get noticed, to get recognized. And it can be a very, very triggering, very unhealthy way to be. And there can be workplace triggers, especially in like really competitive, like high performance environments. I used to work in a law firm and oh my goodness, imposter syndrome in that place was massive. It can also show up for any transition. So if you're moving into a new job, a new school for kids, a new role, any sort of big change where you're slightly out of your comfort zone can really trigger people as well. And I remember back in the day when I started my first official, I'm going to call it a proper job. So my first day as a trainee lawyer at a big law firm in the city. And I came down the stairs to my housemate and she was like, "Oh my goodness, you look amazing. You look so grown up." And I literally said, "I feel like an imposter." I felt like I was pretending to be somebody else to step into this job. Isn't it interesting? And then you've got perfectionism and comparison, and this sort of tendency, especially in today's society, to measure yourself against other people can really trigger imposter syndrome, and it can make people feel inadequate no matter how well they're doing. And actually, imposter syndrome is not a great thing. It can lead to anxiety, burnout, it can undermine our self-confidence, it can hold us back, like super hold us back. Terrible English there. And stop us from reaching our potential, stop us from taking steps outside of our comfort zone, from going for it in new opportunities, because it's a fear of failure, even when we're smashing it. Isn't that interesting? So, how do we deal with imposter syndrome? Well, there's quite a few sort of practical things that you can do. But the first one is to literally acknowledge what you're feeling and label it. This is imposter syndrome. And knowing that, it can be really useful to recognize and separate it from the reality of the situation. Another one, and this is something that honestly, it comes up so much in my mastermind groups, just sharing, talking to others. Honestly, if you get 10 business owners together, chances are 9 or even 10 of them have felt that way, probably within the last week. You wouldn't believe how many people experience imposter syndrome. So, a really lovely tool is to track your wins, to track the evidence of what you're doing well. So, the things, your successes, even if they're small ones, put them in writing, maybe in journal form, whatever works for you. Some people use a jar where they drop them in on a piece of paper. I've never done that. I'm not that organized. But whatever it takes. So when you need to, you can look back, and just the act of writing it down helps to solidify it. It helps to remind you of how far that you've come. I'm also a big believer in celebrating wins, like no matter how big, how small. And it doesn't need to be a big celebration. I'm not talking about going and getting a bottle of champagne every single time you have a little win. I mean, you could, it's a lifestyle choice, isn't it? But it can sometimes just be that little victory dance. I remember early days when I was sitting at my coaching practice, I think I had like a 1-year-old at the time, and we would do like a little victory dance in the kitchen every time I, got like a message about a new client saying yes, or whatever that looked like. So whatever the celebration, mark the moment. And then let's be kind to ourselves. Nobody is perfect, so we need to remember this. Everyone makes mistakes. If we're not making mistakes, we're not growing, we're not trying hard enough. So actually, let's reframe that thought. When that negative voice creeps in, let's, you know, let's counter it. Rather than thinking like, I'm not good enough, thinking, I've worked so hard, I deserve to be there. I deserve to do this. So yeah, I hope this has helped you. The key thing that I want pretty much everyone listening to take away from this is you are not alone. You're not alone. You are good enough. You are worthy. You work hard, and you have created these opportunities and the success. So lean in and keep going. Don't let that little voice in your head hold you back. And if you're thinking, do you know what? I need to be in better community. Come along and join my month start strategy and clarity workshop. Get around some good people just like you who are leaning in, they're growing their business, they're making amazing things happen. and they're not letting that little voice in their head hold them back, or at least not too much. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm delighted that I got past my fear of the solo podcast episode, that I leant in, I got past that little voice of imposter syndrome saying, who am I to do this? Because who am I not to? And actually, I think I'm not even sure where it came from. I doubt it was from me. I bet I read it somewhere inspiring. But whenever there's that voice that says, who am I to do this? You need to think about your future clients and just think, who am I not to do this? So for me, I could have chosen not to do this, just to keep doing my interview format because it's working. It's great. The feedback's amazing. But actually, I know there's people out there in my world who need to hear this stuff, and they need to hear it from me. So thank you for being there. Thank you for being in my world. And thank you for challenging me to show up for you. Have an amazing day, everyone.
Thank you for listening today. If you like what you hear, please hit subscribe and leave us a review. Even better, come connect with me, Ruth Ferreira, on LinkedIn and Instagram. I'd love to get to know you.